Hello.
Hey, everybody.
VBATS is here. Hey, Vincent. It's been a while. We missed you.
Yes. Got like this meeting that just recently switched to, or it got rescheduled. I think it went every other week now, but it's been a constant collision and it's not worth asking either side to reschedule. So
This is the popular meeting time window too. Looks like we've got a decent showing. Who put the second item on the list? The runtime spec issue.
I was that Severin here. Hi.
Hey, I'm going to reorder, make an executive decision and put you first.
Okay.
Just because I know the first item is going to take a long time and I want to make sure that you get an answer before we get distracted.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you.
And I think the answer, as best I understand, if anybody wants to take a look at it, this was the injecting metadata into a container from the runtime level. I think the answer is we don't typically have runtime people join this call.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't have anybody here that can give you a solid answer from the runtime spec side.
Okay. So what is something I can do to, let's say, revive this issue? Just add some comments there once again, or what's a good course of action for that?
We can, I think we can ping the maintainers on the end of that issue and say, hey, can we get something? I'll throw that on there right now.
That's awesome. Because I mean, even if the answer is like, hey, this is never going to happen, then I at least know like this is not something I should follow up on, right? And maybe think more about different approaches. But just to add this is really painful right now to get some observability things running. If you have a situation where you cannot pick this up reliable. So that's why I'm trying to figure out what to do with that.
Yeah, my experience with the runtime spec maintainers is they're mostly operating on the GitHub side. So I put the ping inside there. I don't know, VBAT, you might have more experience than some of us on this one. Do they check Slack or anywhere else that we should be looking at, or mailing list?
no, I think Tiana and myself are maintainers on that one, but as far as like an active, core folks like Akihiro and Cypher and some of them are really more GitHub based. Occasionally you can start an email thread on, if you use the maintainers file and start something in CC dev at open containers, you might be able to get a thread going, but it does seem to be that spec particularly tends to be more GitHub focused.
Okay.
And that's why I want to put you first on the list today. It's like, I don't want you to wait the
Awesome.
whole meeting through while we're debating
Yeah.
all this stuff and just have it come to them and be like, yeah, ping one GitHub.
Yeah, no, that's highly appreciated. So that's helping me a lot. Thank you very much.
No worries. Anything else we should talk about on that one? Or are you comfortable at least with the direction there?
I have at least a direction, right? I mean, if this is helping me, as said, then I will follow up on the GitHub stem. So yeah, again, thank you on that.
Yeah, you bet. And thanks for bringing it up again, because it's something I'd like to see as well. I'm the other person in there chatting saying it sounds like a good idea to me as well. So
okay, happy to hear
that'd
that.
be cool to see that.
That's also good to know that it's not a crazy idea and people say like, hey, no, let's not do that. So that's good.
I keep linking people into this because I see this request coming up in different places, and I say, well, put some attention over on this issue, give it a thumbs up or something like that, just so that the maintainers know that this is something that's wanted.
Yeah. No, okay, good to know. Awesome.
Yeah, and give me a ping. We've been doing some correlation IDs across the stack from kubelet down. We put some additional stuff inside of Containerd as well. If you'd like to talk about it, give me a ping.
I will. What's the best place to give you a ping?
Containerd-dev on CNCF Slack.
Okay. Okay.
Give me an ad. So like.
Yeah. I'm on the CNCF Slack. I just have Slack closed, so I will ping you there then later. Thank you.
Thanks.
Slack overflow. Cool. Well, the other one is kind of continuation. Who wants to start this one up? Jesse, you want to take over?
Can, but I might just keep talking and talking. So I started a PR, and then I realized the issue needed refinement, and then I realized it was probably 2 PRs, and then I was like, 2 issues. So I separated out in the issue to discuss more. Publicly, we'll say inadvertently stepped on Brandon's previous observations, which I did not mean to do. And so made yet another post. And so now I just kind of want to discuss what's in that issue. I do have PRs started. I think it's 2. I think I'd like to decouple the capabilities endpoint versioning discussion from guidance on clients adopting new features. I think we do have an abstract thing to address there, as this is the first minor update of any of the specs. Great time to do it. But, in the future, there might be new things. So I think it's good for us to tackle this. And I think generally my observation on reflection of like your concerns, Brandon, in particular, was really that it's not about fallback or adoption of new features. It's about clients automating that fallback and potentially surprising users. So I think that's the context for the discussion as I see it.
Yeah, I think that sums up my big concern, is that if a client automatically switches from one manifest type to another, that I see a lot of client use cases that are not in the cloud. And those environments, they typically have a registry next to their production cluster. That registry is upgraded last, not first. And so if we do that, we automatically change from the image manifest to the artifact manifest, then those artifacts can't be pushed to the registry associated with production. Suddenly they start losing all the signatures and SBOMs and everything that production relies on to deploy images, and you have an outage. That's kind of the scenario I look at and see a lot of out there in the field. And so I'm trying to avoid the coming train wreck that would happen from this.
I've seen it work both ways, Brandon. I've seen people come in with their own private registries using new stuff as an application. I've also seen them use a default registry, associated with local registries in the cloud when you've already hooked it up to your storage system. So it depends.
It does depend, but yeah, I think that's
there are
part
a
of
lot
our. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that there are a lot of different scenarios out there. This was just one of the big ones that I'm seeing. I'm like, we're going to create something that's going to break down the road. It's easy enough not to break it. And so shouldn't we prefer the scenario where we break the fewest number of people possible.
Yeah,
And
I
what
think,
would that be?
well, yeah, so I think kind of I think the discussion has been around, you know, do clients fall back? Do we promote moving forward? Versus that real central question of, should we guide clients to be very, very aware that if they automate a fallback, that means one day their producers are creating certain types of artifacts, and the next day different types of artifacts. So conversation again from Brandon, and also just with Sajay, who's on the call here in a different context, has kind of swayed me towards saying, yeah, as a spec, we need to abstract that, talk about some use cases, and just give some guidance and make sure it's aware. And again, not something we've had to do before, right? So this is kind of newish
Sort
ground.
of.
Well,
Docker
and then-
1, Docker 2, OCI, yeah, we've sort of been here.
Multi-platform list.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I guess fair
Yeah.
point. I was
Not-
there.
not
I
from
was
the
there for that.
OCI 1.1 to
Right.
1.1, right? Sorry, 1.0 to 1.1. We have,
Yep.
yeah. We predicted it, and we said, we got to solve this versioning thing before we go to 1.1 back in 1.0.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think before I kind of pull triggers on PRs, I just wanted to make sure they weren't going to fall flat or be totally off base. So I think the one, we could tease it apart maybe if it helps. So I think the one thing that's maybe the least nuanced, but maybe still controversial, is a capabilities API endpoint. I don't think it's rocket science to do it. I don't think it should delay us. The question is, do people have concerns with exposing a capabilities endpoint that will give you the version and format types?
Yeah. I think
Is
if we do it, we
that
should introduce it as an alpha. We shouldn't make it mandatory, I don't believe. I think Brandon's initial pattern is a good mandatory for the 1.1 time space. And then, as we go to 1.2, we could maybe make it a mandatory API, but we would have to have recommendations in code that the one would support the 1.1 plan. And the reason for that is because we've got so many people out in the field that have already been doing artifacts pre 1.1, and we need to have roots for that as well. And this is yet another API that isn't in 1.1, right? So unless we decide to hold up on 1.1 for a capabilities.
I think
Yeah, I mean-
if we can pull on a thread of the main central concern there is that we have producers creating artifacts today. I would argue that those are not 1.1 artifacts with an artifact manifest, right?
But you can make the argument, but they may make that argument that these are the same kinds of artifacts that, right, or that we're going to have as we go forward, at least the content.
But they're objectively
But with a
not the
different
same
manifest.
type, right? With different manifest and they're
Yeah.
right. So
Yeah, we're in sync 100%.
okay.
From,
Bats, were you
from my view,
saying something? Or
the
was
direction I
Brandon?
wanted to look at was we kind of worked through a process in there that said, yeah, thanks for joining. We had a process in there. We were saying, here's how you, when you're interacting with the registry, if you try to query this thing, here's how you detect it. If you get a 404 from that, you know that the refers API isn't there. You do the fallback. If we introduce a capabilities API, the question I have is how these things all interact with each other. Spell
Well,
out
I would say that
exactly.
it would be separate. You could still return a 404. I don't think we'd want to turn that off right away.
Yeah, but what I'm
Maybe
looking for is
deprecate it.
what's the client workflow? That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the actual flow through the APIs that the client should take, where the possible
Can
errors
we-
are from that workflow.
Is it possible for us to just focus on the efficacy of the capabilities endpoint first, though? Like that's kind of what I was trying to do. Like I don't understand how those tie. How are those coupled?
But that's what
We
I'm
might
getting
need a
into
work
is
group for it. We might need a small work group, Jesse, for it because of things like proxies. Maybe the artifacts are being pulled from a remote location with the same password. Depends on the implementation in the registry. right? What does capabilities mean? Right? Capabilities that it can pull, or capabilities on the proxy chain to the back end, or capabilities at the client, right? I mean, we haven't talked about that yet, but the same thing may apply. Usually when we do an API, we look at it from two sides, right? In other words, if you did, you might want to say, I'm a client, I support these capabilities. We might go both ways. So we might want to have a little bit of work to at least discuss that possibility.
What I was gonna ask is, do you have a link to more of this capabilities piece? Because not that I'm in any ways endorsing its use, but that whole extensions endpoint and way that people could make extensions to the distribution API
Yeah.
was partially for the same reason. At some point people were talking about, like, how do you query the server to see, like, has it implemented certain endpoints or otherwise like optional or extendable endpoints, just like a capabilities like flag. Is it able to do certain things? It sounds similar, but not to say that it would be reused, but that was like one of the reasons why that conversation even happened.
Yeah, I do remember that, and it kind of did cross, it did cross my mind, and again, I talked to Sajay, and I don't know if he wants to contribute here, but like, I don't mean to throw you out under the bus, but we did talk about this briefly, and he also called that out, like, is this possibly something we do in extensions? Does that sort of violate the spirit of extensions? Is it more of a core API? This to me is just something where if a server is versioned, I want to know what version I'm talking to as a client. It's just that simple. So then going from there to say, well, what does that mean? Right? Like, you can be like, right now we have 1.0-ish registries, right? We all know that. Like, we have 1.0-ish registries. So the idea is to have a little bit more fluency on what it means to be 1.1 or 1.4 or whatever it is in the future by adding the capabilities, which would be effectively like maybe manifest types supported, or just a block, kind of Boolean is referrers there, that sort of thing. So a client could optionally say, okay, it's 1.1, I'm going to use 1.1 spec features, and if they fail, then I'm going to open a bug, right? Versus it's not there at all, I may assume now that that's a 1.0 registry. That seems to me to just be a sort of, like, an obvious thing we need, but it's obviously not obvious because people don't agree.
It's not just the
Well,
version number.
Because I
There's
think
a
it
lot
is just, I think there's optional behavior, and that's unfortunately what's
There's
led
optional
to
behavior. That's what I was going to say. Vince. Yeah,
this whole behavior, this whole pattern, almost like forever when people would do that sniff of, like, is the V2 path ping present, and if
bingo.
and then it's like, if
Yeah.
you sniff past that, it's like, oh, I got a 404, 403 or whatever, anything besides a 200, then it must be this other, it must respond to this other behavior. Anyhow, it's crappy, but that's kind of like the sniffy way that it's
for sure
discoverable.
You talked about a bit check or something at one point, Vincent, I think.
Yeah. Or me, it's come up multiple times. I actually thought about, like, wait, grab a bit field, and then I was like, it's because I'm a C guy from way back. That's dumb. We have JSON. But yeah, like, I want to say something, and then I'll be quiet because Brandon's hand is up. All of that sounded right, and I don't disagree with any of it, and it all sounds like guidance for client implementation. Like, if you see this, you may assume that, right? But it doesn't mean that this is like a magic incantation that can only be uttered in a direct way once, right? It's just information.
Yeah, I think the big question I have is, where do we go with that information? How does that impact the workflow? And I'll throw an example out there, which is, let's say that you specify these are the manifests that I support inside of some capabilities API. And so you query it, says, I support the artifact manifest. And then you go to push the artifact and it says rejected. And it rejects it because it doesn't accept an artifact manifest because it has a subject field on it, and they didn't implement the subject field. And so they don't want the subject field.
Need another bit.
And so, yeah, it did accept an artifact manifest if you format the artifact manifest just the right way.
Is a subject field optional on an artifact?
Well, can a
Apparently
registry
we
reject
negotiated.
content? Does a registry have the option to reject content that it doesn't want to accept? And last time we kind of established that they do. If they see too many annotations, something like that, they can reject it if they wanted to.
Right.
And
Yeah, I think it's a
We kinda
should right
said-
now, Jess.
I mean, I'm down with that. I'm sure we can find even other examples, but I mean, that to me just sounds like I'm going to ping that registry and be like, yo, you got a bug, or why is it behave this way? Or I'm gonna look at their docs.
I mean, I did contact the registry when they did that and said, hey, can you please change
Was it
this? And they
us?
said, we're working on it. And
Was
they,
it us?
to their credit, no, it wasn't you. To their credit, they did work on it. They did get it going better. So that's kind of the direction I'm saying, is that just because someone says I support this manifest doesn't mean that your manifest push is going to work. And so from a client, I
Mhm.
care less about the manifest list that are supported and more, is my push going to work? And I want to do my error handling once, not 2, 3, 4 different times throughout my code.
I don't want to turn this into you all asking me questions that I have answers for. Like, there's a ton of people here, like, I put hands up or just come on camera and start talking. To that, I would say that that's not new. Right? Like, just talk, again, not throwing anybody on the bus. You don't have to come on camera or speak, but Toddy wrote a blog that basically said, hey, I want this to work. And he showed that there's like at least 9 different behaviors for 9 different registries. Like, we already have that. So
Yeah. But
I'd
that's
love
kind of
to
why I
avoid
say,
that, but that's, yeah.
that's kind of why I say, if we're going to add this feature, I'm looking for let's spell out how we're going to use it. Let's not just add a feature because a new feature is cool. Let's spell out, here's the problem we're solving. Here's how the feature solves the issue. Work through the problem and not just say, add a version because we like version numbers.
Yeah, I don't think this would be a version. It's more of a, when we have a should, you probably need to have a bit so that you can know whether the registry at least claims that which decision they've made on the should statements, right? Or mays. Like, you may support, you have to support pull, but you don't have to support, right, push. That's a big switch, but yeah, then there's a lot of small ones.
If you if there was something like this and it could tie back bit fields of what it's checking and whether or not it supports it, tie it back to the conformance test. Did you actually
Exactly.
get a green flag or red flag on that?
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, you can also support the artifact manifest, but only support pulling the artifact manifest, not pushing, because some registries are read only.
I don't really, I don't have a problem with that. I don't see how that precludes the need for the sanity of a check. I don't know. Sorry, Todd, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, like, I agree with everything that is said, right? After my tests, I was also thinking, okay, how I'm gonna use such a check. The only thing is that it will not save me writing some code, but at least I will save some network calls to the registry if I know that something is not supported. And that's how I look at that, right? And on the client side will be like, okay, if I don't support, let's say, the artifact manifest, I will not try to even push it because I don't know. I should expect error, right? It's already clear that I should expect error. It's saving some network traffic when you actually know in advance what is supported and what eventually is supported, right? It may fail again, right? But instead, like, making 5 network calls and try this until you figure out what is not supported. If you have some advanced information, yeah, for sure we don't support those things. And I will know to not try 5 things, I'll try only 3 things. That's how I see it working.
Yeah, it's starting to sound like compliance, right? Like, this sounds like to me like, well, if you're going to say you support this, but you don't, then, well, that's a compliance thing. And again, I think we're veering toward then what should a client do is the client workflow stuff. So at the risk of sounding pedantic or like I'm defending myself, I just want to say, like, as a concept, do we have tangible concerns about a capabilities endpoint? Or are they more related to, well, what if a registry is not compliant? What should a client do with that information? Like, because I mean, I hope I didn't give the impression that I think this is just cool, right? I see a problem in at least 3 different client development projects that are happening at the same time. I see a tangible problem in that they're all doing what Toddy described or have to, right?
So I want to work through the what's the problem to be solved first and how we're going to solve it before we say, okay, now we need the API to do this. So I'm working the problem the other direction instead of saying, let's start from this API and then how can it help everything? Let's actually start with the what are we solving and then how do we solve it? To Toddy's comment there, he was saying, you know, you're going to try one thing, try another thing until you get something that actually works. There are not a lot of scenarios that I think we have doing that. And the few scenarios we have, it's either you're trying the thing that works and then you fall back to the fallback and it's one and done. And so you would save one network call by not doing one network call. And so it's an even trade-off at that point. You might as well have just done that first network call. And if it succeeded, you just save the second network call in that case. So that from my standpoint, it feels like a better scenario if you just start right from the beginning and just say, let's take the happy path, try to see if it works. If it doesn't work, we know the one fallback that we've got.
So what about when a spec is not compliant with its error codes?
I mean, if it says that you got a 200 out of it and it didn't really get a 200 and it just failed everything, I don't know.
How about you get a 40? How about you get a 403?
Yeah,
It-
that is the interesting scenario, because registries return like random error codes and you need to go and parse the error message to understand what the problem is. So they don't comply with the error codes.
Yeah, I usually start if it's one of the known 200 codes, and I'm happy if it's anything else, and I just figure it didn't work. The second part there that I wanted to dig into, I was forgetting is that some of the concept of try a whole long list of things implies that you're going to push an artifact to a registry 3 different ways. And I get that's one option. The other option is I say you're only going to push it one way. And if it doesn't work, you're going to fall back to the user and say, hey, your registry didn't even work with that. Throw the error right back to the user instead of trying multiple paths. And that way the user can say, oh, I tried to do this. And the registry said, hey, I don't support this. You should have used a different flag on your command line. And that pushes the onus back to the user to actually tweak how they're shipping and interacting with the registry. Or gives them the concept that, hey, I asked my tool to do one thing, the registry doesn't work. Maybe I need to upgrade my registry. Bbass, I think you had your hand up next.
While you were talking, Jesse, the almost comedic dovetail was you're going to introduce, and I have no problems with the capabilities API. I was actually for it, even just feature flags or whatever. If we could tie that back to conformance and have like, here's the things that we do support, like unique field numbers or whatever. Like, here's a JSON list of all the conformance things that we do. Cool, great. Is it going to be a must that people implement the capabilities API? Because you might have a long tail on registries that just won't even implement it.
Yeah, I think that was.
So it almost
I
like
think that
sits
was
on
Mike's.
it. It starts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that was Mike's question. I actually raised my eyebrow at that. I think we'd have to say they must, because then if it's not there, then a client may assume all may assume that it's a 1.0 registry. If it's not there simply because they didn't feel like it, then it's useless. Kind of.
And I think we've danced around having some of those kind of like musts, just because of the way that OCI and all the different projects have evolved. But it might be that it's like we see that we collectively see as all the different major registry providers and ability to talk to the different projects that have registries, like this is a necessary cleanup or whatever. So I'm just saying, like, introducing a new endpoint that itself must be mandatory so that you can even discover this kind of like presupposes some of your same argument.
I was just going to say that kicking it back to the user, Brandon, which you said is not always possible. If you have an automated system, you're not going to have a user in the loop to make that determination every time. We need tools so that our systems can talk to each other.
But there's error messages, logs. Yeah, I write tooling that just copies stuff back and forth between registries all the time. And the thing I quickly fall back to is that if the copy fails, I don't try to change what I'm copying. I just throw an error back to the user and say, hey, there was something wrong there. And I still try to copy all the other stuff I can copy. And so
But like,
I think depending
Brandon,
on what tool it is we're writing.
you've seen incredibly large deployments, right? Like to Aaron's point, you've seen hundreds or thousands of pipelines pushing out hundreds of thousands of deployments and having millions of container instances, right? Like you've seen that before. So a human in the loop doesn't always work there. And I think
What gets me nervous when you have a massive deployment like that is I don't want to change what we're pushing because of where we're pushing it to.
What do you mean? What you mean, the artifact
say,
type? Like automatically
if the
pushing a
user's-
different type of artifact type?
If the user says, I want to push a artifact manifest, and then you fall back and say, I'm going to change what I'm pushing and use the image manifest because of some issue with this registry. That's
Right,
where I
but
get.
but that's not the capabilities endpoint discussion. And on that discussion, we have talked about maybe making that manual all the time, like through specification. So that again, like I think we're still conflating automatic fallback and using manifest versus artifact images versus artifacts. I don't understand
Yeah,
how
I
those
just
are,
wanna-
Well, Jesse, I
those are
think
so
there
tightly
may be a
tied.
use case where we could define the fallback portion that's in the 1.1 spec as a bit field that, registry could say, I support the fallback, because it is in the spec.
But it's not a registry implementation. You don't support the fallback. Fallback is like basically a 1.0 registry supports the fallback.
I don't
I
think
piggybacked
all
on you, Aaron,
1.0
where you-
registries support the fallback. Let's put it that way.
I think
Not all 1.0 registries return sane HTTP codes either, but like,
Bingo.
yeah.
Now
all
you're
right,
on.
Aaron, let's put Aaron back on.
Yeah, I think to answer Brandon, you said that you don't want your clients necessarily automatically implementing some change in behavior due to capabilities API, but that's a client decision, right? Like if I choose to have my system implement and use the fallbacks are not a must, right? I can choose to require that my copy be a full fidelity. I'm going to copy manifest to manifest because maybe I have things like I could be signing, for example, the SHA of the manifest. And that's just, you cannot down convert that to a image manifest. That would change the SHA. It would mean that the signature is invalid. So I think that's what I would say is let the clients decide whether or not they want to implement the automatic fallback, but then use the capabilities API to allow clients that want to do that to do so automatically.
Buddy?
Yeah, I don't want to derail the whole conversation, but we also had some discussions of just providing a header for every response to say the compliance. Is that something that we also don't think will be useful, or? So you don't have a separate capabilities API, but at least in the header responses you can say, okay, I'm 1.0 or 1.1, actually 1.1, 1.2 compliant or something like this.
Like, so you could just do a get on V2 and look at the header versus a get on capabilities.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, JSON and a response body just feels nicer, but you could do that. I think regardless, I think we're still hung up on being scared of what clients will do and automate based on this information versus, presenting the information.
Yeah, that's true.
It's
Yep.
I just
Yeah,
want
I
to
think-
note that, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just want to note that when you introduce a capabilities API, you create sort of a permission structure for specifications to fracture. And so I think that's a really fundamental decision is am I OCI 1.1 compliant, or am I OCI 1.0 or 1.x plus features A, X, Z compliant, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of the big fear that I've got is when you're walking down a path of the client is following a workflow. The client is saying, I'm trying to send this data over here or pull some data from a registry one way or the other. It's going through a logical set of steps where it's going to hit some API, get a response, take some action based off of that. And different clients could take different paths, and that could really fracture the user experience from users down the road. And so I'd really like to start with what is the path that OCI recommends that everybody goes down, because we've got that today for the rest of the spec. We've got that when you're pushing an image, you push the blobs first, then you push the manifest, and these things must line up. And so to say, okay, we're going to have another path out there that can go a different direction, there's a concern for me that I want to make sure that we actually spell out what is the path that we think people should be walking down.
I'm gonna look back quick on what Aaron said because I took it a different way, and it actually literally is the same description I used for desiring a version and not a capabilities endpoint. So I first floated a version endpoint because I wanted to basically have a registry be able to say, I support version 1.2 of the spec, not I support 1.2-ish of the spec, and these are the ways that I do and don't. So that, I mean, I think that a lot more clearly is the risk there, and I appreciate you calling it out. And I think maybe multiple PRs, I don't know, but that was my concern with capabilities, is saying, well, you say you're 1.1, but you don't have a referrers endpoint. What does that mean? Right? That things start getting fractured. I don't think things start getting fractured when we version a spec and we say this is 1.1, this is 1.2. That's not fracturing, that's versioning, in my opinion. We are more than half an hour, or about half an hour into this conversation. I don't feel like we're any closer. I feel like we're still not even closer to untangling things, which I was trying to do. I really am trying to decouple the concerns so we can address them one at a time. I would like to say for posterity that I am thinking about the user experience too. And I'm not just willy-nilly suggesting things because they're cool and they'll look good on an album cover. That's really not what I'm doing. I'm trying to actually reflect the experience I have in past protocol and line spec work. This is how we do it. So having kind of a client guess what it might be able to do just seems not nice to me. And again, like if we want to go through the specifics, what happens when you try to push an artifact and you get a 403, which is an auth error? It isn't I didn't accept that because it's an artifact, it's an auth error. So what do you do there? Which is technically a compliance question, but.
As a client that has seen my fair share of errors from registries, yeah. I pretty much start with
kind of rando.
Yeah. I pretty much start with if you don't give me back one of the happy 200 codes that I was expecting, I treat everything else as just a failure at that point. You know, I'll give the user a response back that says this was the failure I saw, and hopefully it was a well-defined failure, but I treat them all as failures.
I don't know if TNN wants to bring forward his point on the namespace issue or repository issue. Might be a capabilities problem, right? Whether you support artifacts, are they paying for it or that sort of thing?
Oh, just concerned that granular support for artifacts is going to change based on different factors, like whether or not I'm authenticated, because if I authenticate to Docker Hub as TNN, I can't push to VBATS repositories like that unless he grants me access because, you know, he likes me. So my point there is that just like the granular nature of what you can and can't do with a registry changes based on different factors of how you interact with it and how you're trying to interact with it.
Right.
Which is why I think the version proposal makes more sense than a capabilities API. I'm caveat, I'm not a distribution maintainer. I've just been part of this community for a very long time. Because if a registry says I support distribution spec 1.1, and then I go, oh yeah, that means I can push, right? So I go push, and then the push fails. That's a different, like I have an expectation that that registry probably supports OCI artifacts, but I don't necessarily have a guarantee that it supports OCI artifacts, which even a capabilities API wouldn't give me a guarantee that it supports OCI artifacts, or even this specific OCI artifact that I'm trying to push. Because the
Especially when
schema of it
subject
might be
refers to a public,
funky.
right? Yeah. Yeah, especially with, I was saying, you know, with the subject refers to a public registry that you don't own or you don't have access to, it's Docker root, 0, or.
Yeah, so I guess
private.
another way to put this is that I see the capabilities API, if it's granular, as making a promise that the registry can't actually make without knowledge of the request you're trying to make. Unless it knows the exact payload you're trying to insert, it can't really tell you whether or not it's willing to accept it. Because you might check that the registry accepts artifacts, it says yes. And so you try to upload 100 gigabytes and it goes, no, I won't accept that. That's not reasonable.
Mhm.
At the end of the push, right? Makes
But
sense.
isn't that like a rollback access control? So that, because in this case you will get like 403, right? Which hopefully every registry will return that. And they will be honest on that. So I think we should not mix like the access control with the capabilities, right? You need to make decisions also on your access control.
Yeah, and the assumption could be that if the capability is there, it assumes with authentication or with authorization.
Yeah, with like, you have two levels. One is there this capability? And then can I really use that capability? Which is a different type of decision you need to make.
And that could be useful information. Yeah.
I think the reason that the auth is interesting though, is that it really brings up, because there are a lot of different reasons that a push could fail. But it brings up that I think what we're trying to do is say that before I even try to do the push, I want to know, will the push work? And I think what we're getting at is that you don't know until you do it. Because
Yeah,
there are a lot of reasons a registry can reject it.
I think it's more, can you expect it to work? Just to put a finer point on it, I don't think, you know, if I say, oh, you have this API and I'm gonna work with it. I know you have it, and now I work with it, right? The problem is that with artifact types, there's literally no way to know now. And so you just poke a registry and try to discern the truth, and you still don't know. That's the problem.
Yeah,
so at least
but I
if
think that
if that registry tells you it's 1.0, you could be like, oh, they don't support that. Or if it tells you 1.1, you
But
can
they
say,
can.
I expect them to.
that's the big thing though, is that I suspect what Mike's going to say, but feel free to raise your hand as soon as I say this if it's not, is that a registry can say I'm 1.0 and still accept an artifact manifest. There's nothing saying
So?
that it can't, because
What
So,
I was
but-
going to say, what I
I'm
was
not
going to say is
talking
similar
about-
to that
yeah.
line. But
Ugh.
when we run our conformance tests, we actually have a table of how they support, right? And in some respects, our compliance testing with our conformance table is already a capabilities, API, if you will, but only from the perspective of we run it and these things do work or don't work. And what we're sort of saying is, well, for some of these shoulds, maybe it would be nice if that registry told a client what those results should be, as opposed to having to go to the website and finding out how they
Right.
whether it was successful in conformance.
That's fair.
The challenge I have with the version number is I don't know how I can use it. So let me walk you through the scenarios, because this is what I'm trying to get from this
Can I
conversation. So
rewind
let's
to-
actually walk through the scenarios.
Can I rewind to one thing that you said though? Like I don't understand why it's a concern that a 1.0 registry might have a refers API or
That's why I
might
wanna walk
accept
through this.
artifacts.
That's why I want to walk
Oh.
through this. So
So, but starting with the concern, I don't understand why it's a concern. It might just be me, but I
Can
don't,
I answer?
that's. I guess, yeah.
But so walking through this as a client, if I'm writing my client, if I queried a registry and it said, I'm a 1.0 registry, as a client, I don't know what to do with that. And the reason why is because they may partially support an artifact or refer. They may support one or the other. Maybe they support both and just something else isn't implemented. But I don't know which of the APIs that I want to try to run against it are going to work or not. And so I still have to, at some point, still try those APIs if my task is I need to try to push this content up there. And so I'm still going to attempt to push my artifact. I'm still going to query the refers API, and I'm still going to push the fallback tag if the refers API didn't work. So my workflow didn't change at all by seeing that it was a 1.0 registry. And if it was a 1.1, I'm still going to do all those same things. And if I get an error from any of those things, I'm still going to go through the same error process at the end. And so both of my paths were unchanged, regardless of what the version was. And so that's what I'm trying to pull out is what are we changing from the client workflow based off of what that version is?
Yeah. I will, for the purposes of my own feelings, I will stop replying to this. You have made that clear. You have said it before. You have iterated several times. I still don't understand why it's a concern. You as a client developer or implementer can build whatever you like. And a 1.0 registry can do whatever cockamamie stuff it wants to do. And your client can support that cockamamie stuff. All cool. What we'd like is for a happy path 1.1 and beyond to have a clear failure mode. I might build a client and say, I'd like to push an artifact, check the version, it's 1.0, not even going to try. And then I write just clean code that doesn't push an artifact. I just use fallback. It says 1.1, I push an artifact, I expect refers. If it's broken, I open a bug. That's all I'm saying. Like, I don't understand why that's a problem.
Because I honestly feel like that's a broken behavior. If a registry starts to support artifacts and the client says, I want to push an artifact up to there with the artifact manifest, I feel like you shouldn't look at the registry saying, I'm a 1.0 registry and say, I'm not even going to try. Because all the inputs in there were saying, attempt it. And the registry is saying, I support it. I just don't support this other thing. And so I couldn't put the 1.1 version on my registry because it didn't have it there. Sasha, I see with your hand up.
Hey, I can maybe give some context on that specific conversation. So one of the discussions was, I think this came as a part of the Auras implementation as well. They wanted to push the artifact manifest and use the referers. Now, the problem is when they tried to work with Docker Hub, once you push the artifact manifest, you cannot use the referers API right now. The other thing is you cannot delete the artifact manifest in Docker Hub also, because there's no delete API. So you're kind of in an inconsistent state. So what I recommended was check the referers API, then try pushing the artifact manifest. And that way you have a clean 1.1 implementation. Otherwise, use image manifest and update index. This might be one option. If there's another way to kind of like determine this, maybe that's kind of the motivation for, hey, should we even try this? Can you tell us whether these things, this new path should even be used? Is what a client can quickly fail and get an error saying that, okay, this doesn't support referers, it doesn't support artifacts, and then just go with the 1.0 full implementation, which is using the fallback. Or you go with referers and artifacts. The hybrid approach I'm not a fan of, but I don't think we can escape that the way it is today. Somebody might support artifacts, somebody might support referers. We might be in between. But which way do we want to go? I just wanted to kind of like give you context on the scenario of where this came from. That's all.
So let me follow up with that scenario. Can Docker Hub ever say that they're a 1.1 OCI registry, even after they add refers and the artifact manifest? because they don't support deletion or they don't support some other API that we say they need to support. And so, well, you never upgrade to the new capabilities even after Docker Hub adds all the features that you wanted.
I think that's a question for the registry implementer, right? Like, do they want to call themselves 1.1 in the ISO OCI? Or do they want to say that, yes, we support all these APIs and you have to make a choice. For example, we don't support deletion API, even though it's there on the spec. There's a portion of the spec that they don't support. But the point is, if clients are using this header in a particular way, like you said, I totally support, like, let's call out the use case. Let's call out why it's necessary before we recommend the capabilities or a header API. That's a precondition, in my opinion, even to get this thing moving. But these are the scenarios that would help define why the header, how the header would be used. If Docker Hub decides that, yes, this header is used in so and so way, and so it'll help clients, and then we'll publish it as 1.0. But we won't allow a portion of the specification, like image spec extension fields are not supported in ECR, right? That might be an implementation thing, and they can call it out as a caveat as these portions are not. So it is up to the client in some way. But just to answer your question, these are the scenarios that I see as why the header might be used as a quick fail and quick fallback, and don't even go with 1.0 because we're not ready yet. Rather than making 2 API calls right now, which is artifact push plus the referrers, versus maybe on V2 when you ping, one of the options that I suggested was actually send out a header so that you don't even try this other path, and you can cache that header value across multiple requests, across, like, you don't even prepare the artifact manifest, so you save CPU cycles on that. You don't try to create annotations, or like there's options that we can use for just perf optimize if we have some indication that don't go down this path across automation, because if you're writing to disk, you're wasting time also. So those are the different scenarios that might help.
Yeah, I definitely get you don't want to throw junk up to registry you're not going to be able to use later on. The fear that I've just got is that Hub is going to upgrade and you're not going to support their upgrade because you don't see that 1.1 version in there. And so I don't think we have enough detail in either the capabilities API, and especially not in the version field, to be able to make a logical conclusion there of whether or not the API calls that you want to run are going to work or not.
Totally agree. I'm not saying that we have to do the API. I'm just saying that this is the scenarios that need to back why the API might need to exist, or a header might need to exist, whatever the implementation is.
Patty?
Yeah. So Brendan, maybe one more generic question. So what I hear you saying is that registries may or may not support something. Is it our expectation that there will be no common set of functionalities that all registries support? Because like the way I imagine it is like, look, I have certain functionalities that I can expect from every registry based on whatever the specification is, right? And if there is any additional functionalities that the registries provide, when that's fine, then I can do all this magic on querying, trying and failing and so on. But at least for basic things that we put in the specifications, they should be expected based on the version of the specification. This is like the way I think about that is like, right now I am feeling in the situation like I will go and plug in my laptop in the outlet, and if it doesn't burn, then it means it's 110 volts. If it burns, it's like 220 volts, right? It's that's the trial and error, like, and sometimes the trial and error can be quite expensive.
Yeah, I saw John give a thumbs up to your original question though, and I suspect his answer was along the lines of, it's hard to have any registry give you a guarantee. It's hard to say from the OCI spec that every registry must support a certain superset of everything, of multiple things or whatever, just because so many registries take just a slice. Some registries are push only, some registries are pull only, some registries don't allow the tag API. And part of our conformance test was give us a list of things you want us to test, and we'll give you that green check of saying everything you wanted us to test was valid and here's the things we didn't even bother testing. And so you get the checks nexus in there, even though you pass some kind of conformance test.
Yeah, but once again, I would like to separate the push and pull from capabilities. For me, push and pull are not capabilities, it's more access control. Like I can pull, but I cannot write, right? And that's access control. But if
Yeah,
I
but we're
had the
gonna-
right, if I had the right capabilities and access, then I can do those things, which are the same things that I can do in this registry and this registry and this registry. And it's not the superset, more the common set of capabilities. Right.
Yeah,
I understand that every registry will support different things, but there should be some common set of capabilities that I should expect from every registry.
I don't know if we can say there's a common set across everything, just because from the conformance test, you can pick and choose among those different categories and say, this one I want to test, this one I don't want to test. And we're going to give you that green check as long as you passed a set of tests that you want to run for a certain thing.
Okay.
That's kind of the big challenge.
Yeah, that may be my wrong expectation, but thanks for clarifying.
Yeah. It's a good question. John, I see you chatting. I see you giving thumbs up. I don't know if you want to chime in here and give your own take on this one.
Use spicy to be recorded.
I missed what he was saying, but it sounded like, maybe you didn't want to go on the record with it recorded. Yeah, that's
Just
kind of the,
sorry, just to kind of, I'm reading John's comment. Well, if I say that the registry is 1.0, they are common like capabilities. But let's say if we go to spec 1.1, and I know that when the registry returns that it is compliant with spec 1.1, they are common set of capabilities. That's what I meant. I'm not saying that all registries in the world, like one registry will be compliant with version 1.0, another with 1.1, another with 1.2, and so on. But if I get back from the registry, yes, I'm compliant with 1.1, I should expect certain levels of capabilities that are common if I query another registry that says that it's 1.1. That's what I'm looking for.
and that's where it gets really complicated, because in the past, we very much said that you can be OCI conformant and not support the tag API, for example. And so you couldn't list tags on a registry, even though they are conformant with all the other 1.0 specs. And so I think it's hard to say you're 1.1 and therefore you must support all of these things, because we've never done that in the past.
Okay, makes sense. Thanks.
And again, not part of the proposal, right? Not the 1.0 spec is so loosey goosey as to not even qualify as like RFC quality spec, right? It is open, compliance is flexible and malleable. No one has suggested that if you report 1.1, you must implement all things, right? The question is, do we care about sanity for clients? If most client people are represented by Brandon's voice, then the answer is no. And if nobody wants to talk about this anymore, we can just drop it. I won't even bother opening a PR. That's what I'm hearing. So if anybody disagrees with me, speak now. Otherwise, I'll just drop this.
I disagree. I think, Jesse, I think over time, we need to progress to a more RFC compliant kind of specification. I don't think we should be loosey-goosey forever, right? I think
It wasn't meant tongue in cheek. It is loosey goosey. We all agree with that, right?
Oh, it is. Oh, yeah.
Okay. I didn't
And
mean
how
it
do
like
you get there? How do you get to be slightly less loosey-goosey, I think, is what we're trying to get to. Or at least that's what I'm trying to get to.
okay.
I don't care if it takes 4 years. How do we get there? Right. So that we can have a little bit more common registry implementations, at least with respect to the APIs that we think in distribution are important for the users of OCI, right? And that's both sides, registries and clients. And I think that's necessary. we want to use these artifacts for very important things. And we're going to have a lot of expectation that that content can go from registry to registry. People can copy things down and then replicate them back up to another registry, and it's still going to work. Eventually, we've got to get there, I think, in my opinion. It's my opinion.
I know we're hitting time. Amy was so patient. There was, before people jump, in the notes, there's a link
It's
to a
over in
survey
the
she
dev
put there.
list too. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Basically, like the research team reached out to me and said, "Hey, we have a survey around the state of open standards. If you want to weigh in, please weigh in." The end. That's all.
Waited all the way to the end just for that one little bit. Thank you so much,
It's
Amy.
totally fine, and it was like it's fun to be able to see you all get to the knockdown drag out. This is like the most heated this group gets. Clearly, it's very exciting. Thank you.
Still pretty tame. It's been years. Just you have to dig way back.
It's a good time.
It's the first of the year. This is fun.
You know, everybody has their own version of fun. This one was a good one. Maybe this meeting should have been an email. Yeah.
Thanks for everybody
Brandon, that
being
was all I had.
civil.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
See y'all.
See ya.
Bye.